Hello and welcome to Sex Pattern. I'm gonna start a new series. What if Deku was the sin of lust? If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
A group of influential individuals known as the Seven Deadly Sins lived in Britannia thousands of years ago, who defended the land against numerous dangers. And the Sins were all able to live full lives after they vanquished the Demon King and the Supreme Deity. Each produced offspring who in turn established centuries-long bloodlines. Though not in the conventional sense, Gauther the goat sin of lust, one of the sins, had his own offspring. As you can see, Gauther uses a doll to naturally conceive. But with his friend Merlin's assistance, he managed to replicate his own soul, transfer it to a person of the opposite gender, and create a child. As the ages went by, each generation of Gother's line became more and more human. The child would be half doll, possess his personality and magical abilities, and be able to procreate naturally. You were unable to physically distinguish between them, but you could infer from their personalities that something was amiss. The red goat-shaped birthmark on their chest is one way to identify them as Gother's descendants. After a few millennia, we arrive in modern-day Japan. However, in this version of the nation, more than 80% of people possess a superpower known as a quirk. Izuku Midoriya, a junior high school student, is one of these individuals. He possesses the Gauther power known as invasion, which enables him to read, modify, or erase other people's memories as well as imprison them mentally. The young man would probably be classified as autistic because he is extremely distant and struggles to understand social interactions, including humor. Additionally, he frequently poses and enters people's memories without their consent, primarily for informational purposes. Because of this, he was known as the goat sin of lust. A villain with a gigantification quirk who was attacking the street the boy was using to get to school stopped him abruptly as he was walking there. As the hero, Kamui Woods, began to attack the villain but had little impact. The boy gazed at the scene in a curious bewilderment. Izuku saw this as a chance to learn more about the hero, so he turned his finger into a finger gun and pointed it at the villain before shooting him with a pink energy bolt that was only slightly larger than a pencil. As the attack struck the villain and zapped him with that pink energy, the boy said in a neutral tone, "Rewrite light." The villain froze and asked, "What's going on?" After the green-haired boy's quirk took effect, he looked around bewildered, as though he didn't comprehend what was happening. The Arbor hero only needed this diversion to use his special move, the Lacard Chain Prison, which immobilized the villain instantly and made it possible for him to be arrested shortly after. Interesting, it seems that my hypothesis about a lapse in memory causing a temporary bout of confusion allowed Kamui Woods the time he needed. And his ultimate move was indeed very interesting. I think I better make note of it. He thought as he wrote down his thoughts. He uttered these words as he jotted down notes about anything he could handle in a notebook he carried with him. When he got to class a few hours later, his teacher had just asked them what they wanted to do for a living. In response, everyone expressed their desire to be heroes while displaying their eccentricities. Katsuki Bakugo, a student with an explosion quirk who was also a prodigy and Izuku's childhood friend, interrupted this. Izuku called him Kachan. He would have been a bully to Izuku in a different timeline. In this case, however, he was the one who typically prevented Izuku from searching through people's memories and assisting him in specific social circumstances. Although Bakugo and Izuku were undoubtedly friends, Bakugo also had a more big brotherly bond with Izuku because he had to discipline the boy constantly when they were younger. Bakugo still believed that Izuku was pretty hopeless, but he never really made it sound cruel because Izuku's quirk only really affects memory and the mind. However, the Pomeranian recently announced that he would be attending the national school, UA. He yelled, "Hey teach, don't lump me in with these rejects." When the teacher asked Izuku if he was also attending UA, the other students began to glare at him. The green-haired boy nodded and made an unusual salute. "Zing," he said in a humorous manner. Everyone was understandably frustrated because the boy had consistently acted in such a manner. He laughed and asked rhetorically, "Ha, what are you gonna do, Deku? Make villains have short-term memory loss?" Neutrally, the autistic teen pointed out, "Actually, I did that rather successfully recently." "Ha!" exclaimed the explosive boy, and the bespectacled brunette gave him a jovial smile and a tilt of her head. Izuku walked home by himself after this, writing down some last-minute notes in his notebook and idly passing the time in his mind as he usually did to keep his mind busy, until he happened to walk beneath a rather dubious-looking bridge. He was too preoccupied to notice sludge rising from a sewer cover he had just passed. The sludge said, "Well, look what we have here," to catch the teen's attention. Before being seized by the sludge villain, Izuku thought, "Oh, well, isn't this just a predicament? Alright, you brat, stay still so I can use you as a skin suit." The man made of sludge snarled as he attempted to take control of the teen's body. Izuku let out a sigh as the sludge began to encircle him. As he began firing a shotgun burst of invasion blasts at random like a machine gun, he coughed, "Gatling Jack." The blasts bounced off the walls and diverted the villain until one struck, wiping out his short-term memory. The villain asked, utterly perplexed, "Where am I? What am I doing?" Izuku exploded out of his hold as soon as it relaxed, dusting himself off before realizing that his glasses were gone, which caused his vision to become somewhat blurry. Looking around for his glasses, he sighed and said, "Oh no, where'd my glasses go?" The sludge antagonist fumbled around in complete bewilderment while searching for his missing ocular piece. However, they were both moving aimlessly when they heard a loud crash of metal. A loud voice said, "There's no need to fear. Now that I'm here, that is." Just as Izuku was finding his glasses, the boy sat up and hummed. His eyes refocused and he eventually put on his glasses. He made a remark, not really responding to the man's abrupt appearance. "Oh, hello All Might." The number one hero nodded in response, then turned his attention to the still fumbling sludge villain who was his target. "You as well, young man." After booming, "As for you, Texas Smash." He delivered a punch that knocked the autistic teen back inadvertently and scattered the sludge villain. Izuku fell on his rear and gasped, "Oof." As he helped the boy up, the hero said, "Sorry, young man. I just didn't want you to get grabbed again." Dusting himself off, the goat Sin seemed unfazed and said, "It's fine." He said, "May I ask your name?" The teen gave the man his name and struck his trademark salute pose, asking, "Izuku Midoriya." The sin of lust, the goat Sin. After a quick review of his recollections, the mountain of muscle recognized that the adolescent in front of him had autism spectrum disorder. That would account for a good number of his more intriguing tics. "I'm sorry, Goat Sin," asked All Might. The boy explained quite bluntly, "It's a nickname I got when I was little. A thirst and lust for all forms of knowledge is what I have." He appears to be someone who would like to learn everything he can. He thought to himself, maybe. Then he shook his head. He said to the child, "Well, be careful from now on, all right young Midoriya." Izuku nodded and gave him another salute. "Roger that." Then All Might turned around and leapt to another rooftop, but as he was leaving, Izuku saw that the bottle he had collected the sludge villain in fell out of his pocket due to the leap. The boy booked it to the building where All Might was going, saying, "Uh-oh. Better tell him what happened." Later, one hero was genuinely shocked to see Izuku bolt through the door, appearing a little exhausted, as he landed on the building he had planned to enter. All Might, trouble, need who, help," the boy whimpered, as he struggled to put it into words. The man said, "Calm down, young Midoriya, what's happened?" But Izuku quickly saw that he was steaming when he looked at him. With his head tilted in perplexity, the boy asked, "Why are you steaming?" "Oh no, not right now." Before his entire body was covered in steam and out of sight, the man experienced an internal panic. When he reappeared a few moments later, he was as thin as Izuku himself. The teen with the green hair remarked, blinking, "Well, that's rather peculiar." The man sighed as he sat with Izuku on the roof and showed him his stomach injury, saying, "Yeah, guess this requires an explanation. Pretty gross, right? I got this in a fight 5 years ago. My respiratory system was basically destroyed and I lost my whole stomach. I'm only just now starting to recover thanks to a stomach transplant I had last year," he said. Izuku furrowed his brows slightly before using his quirk to read All Might's memories and the feelings that went along with them. One tear fell down his cheek as he experienced the man's grief over the memory of his mentor, who saved him from death. The only thing the goat Sin could say was, "Oh." Unaware that Izuku was taking advantage of his peculiarity, the gaunt man sighed and nodded, "Yeah, it's not a fun experience." Izuku held up a finger as a sliver of pink energy appeared on it and asked, "All Might, if I may ask, do you think I could be a hero with a quirk like mine?" Observing the sliver of energy, the blonde inquired, "What is your quirk, young man?" "It is called invasion. It allows me to read, remove, alter, or even trap someone in their own memories or brainwash them. The teenager with autism clarified, quote, like I did to experience your emotions in your battle 5 years ago. He continued. All Might was taken aback by this information and briefly fell silent. He was a little uneasy that this boy had read his thoughts and witnessed his battle with his adversary 5 years earlier, but he was also curious about how the quirk was applied. There was a brief pause before the man answered the boy's query. He chose to conceal his uneasy feelings as he responded, "To be honest, young man, I am not entirely sure. That quirk could be difficult if used improperly, but it could be very useful for hero work." Izuku was both pleased and uncertain to hear this. "So what you're saying is that it's possible, but not exactly probable?" he asked. All Might apologized to him, saying, "I'm sorry, young man. I wish I could give you a better answer." Izuku appeared to nod in comprehension at this, but before he could say anything more, there was an explosion in the distance, and almost instantly, he realized what he had forgotten to tell All Might. He let out a cry, "Oh, how could I forget that?" At that, with a tense body, the lanky hero exclaimed, "Forget what?" The man checked his pockets after Izuku yelled, "The bottle holding the villain from before fell out of your pocket when you jumped." And the bottle was indeed gone. "Damn it, how could I make a rookie mistake like that?" he screamed. The boy bowed his head shamefully and said, "I apologize, I let myself lose my train of thought." With Izuku chasing after him, All Might yelled, "No time for stuff like that. I need to get to the crime scene." Before he fled somewhere else, Katsuki was the one who had been captured by the sludge villain at the blast site, and in an effort to escape, he kept causing explosions and fire everywhere, which was, to be honest, only making matters worse. "Damn it, you overgrown slimeball, let me go," he screamed, further damaging everything. However, All Might and Izuku showed up on the scene a few minutes later. However, unlike in a different timeline, the villain was about to attack both boys as he was gradually becoming normal again, but All Might stopped him because he was moved by the boy's bravery and had gone above and beyond his comfort zone to save him. Because of his more or less emotionally detached nature, the boy not only threw his backpack to divert the villain's attention, but he also obviously planned. However, by erasing and rewriting his memory, he also used his move Rewrite Light to confuse the villain and force him to temporarily let go of Bakugo. The red-eyed teenager yelled, "Grrrahhhhh," as he blasted himself away from the villain and managed to free himself. "Izuku, what are you doing here?" he asked. "Not the time. We should get back into the crowd, before he recovers." The kid replied, "It's the most logical course of action." He continued. The Pomeranian blonde nodded, "Right," and the two returned to the crowd just as the sludge man was getting better. As he was gradually becoming normal again, he roared angrily, "Damned mental scrambling brat. I'll kill you." But just as he was about to attack both boys, All Might stopped him. Inspired by the Goat Sin's bravery, All Might went above and beyond to save him. As he charged up a devastating downward punch, the symbol of peace roared, "Thank you, young man, you did well, and now I will do my very best to follow your example." Blood spurted from his mouth. Then he lifted his fist and struck the villain, sending it flying and scattering him all over the place. Following this, Bakugo and Izuku were both commended for their eccentricities, and Izuku for his heroic deeds. The boy was intrigued by how he seemed to be making everyone feel, and he also came across as blunt, which put the heroes off, much to Bakugo's dismay when he had to explain what was wrong with his friend. Later, Izuku thought about what he had witnessed as he made his way home in the sunset after the sludge villain drama was over. But All Might stopped him as he was making his way home. He chose to talk to him about what he had said earlier that day, so he did this. "Young man, I believe I should apologize to you for what I had said earlier. My answer was far too vague, and you deserved a direct answer," he replied. Izuku told him plainly, "It's fine, after all, you were only speaking logically." The number one hero firmly informed the teenager, "Regardless, I know now, and I am here to tell you this answer. You can become a hero with a quirk like yours, I am fairly certain of that." Izuku's normally expressionless face was now clearly covered in a mixture of surprise and joy, which is understandable given his reaction. With his arms extended, as though for emphasis, the man went on, "And as such, I deem you worthy of my power, and to become my successor, my quirk is yours to inherit." Izuku's expression quickly shifted from happiness to perplexity as he cocked his head to the side, gazed at the top hero, and allowed his words to sink in. As he responded, he adjusted his glasses. His head tilted to reflect his confusion, revealing the red goat tattoo on his chest as he asked, "Forgive me for not understanding, but what do you mean by inherit?" When All Might told Izuku that he was worthy of inheriting his power, Izuku looked curiously perplexed because, as far as the boy knew, it was impossible to pass on a quirk to someone else. Unless, of course, this specific oddity was an exception to that fact. Before he could say anything more, he would need to find out. The boy asked, "When you say inherit, what do you mean by that?" The man clarified, "My quirk is a unique case of where it can be passed on to someone else. Additionally, it stockpiles and grows in power as it's passed along, granting whoever's using it immense power in exchange." He went on. He continued by saying, "Its name is One for All. I've never heard of such a quirk before. To happen across someone with one is amazing." Izuku looked up. "Are there any conditions that must be met before it can be inherited?" He asked. "Only for you to willingly accept it and to mold your body into a proper vessel," he was told by All Might. Izuku appeared to accept this information with ease, as he merely nodded, got to his feet, and approached a wall before punching it, causing the concrete to collapse into a crater. The goat Sin looked back at an astonished All Might and said, "I understand the reason, but I don't think it will be necessary." He blinked and said, Okay, then," he remarked, pointing to the boy's lanky frame, which he now realized was deceptively strong. "I was honestly expecting you to not have much strength, given your physical appearance. A side effect of my quirk's nature. It makes my body more resilient than most despite having no physical training and makes me incapable of feeling pain." The Sin of Lust clarified. "In that way, I'm more of a doll than a human." He continued. Slowly, the blonde man said, "That last part sounds rather self-depreciative." Izuku clarified, "It's less of that and more of an actual fact. And in a world filled with people who are physically similar to objects or animals or odd in appearance but are still human, I fail to see how being like a doll seems less like an example of the existing status quo than an example of being inhuman." He went on. With his head cocked, he continued, "That kind of assumption always seemed illogical to me." The man pondered thoughtfully. "Well, when you put it that way, it does make sense," he said, "but I guess this means you accept." Izuku affirmed, "I do." "Very well, then. Tomorrow we'll begin your training to better mold your body and get it accustomed to using One for All." The peace symbol gave a nod. He said to the boy, "So be ready." The teen with autism nodded and said, "I will." Time skip. At the municipal beach in Dagoba the following morning. Heave ho, heave ho, heave ho. Izuku plodded along the shoreline, pulling a refrigerator with All Might perched atop. One hero said, "Wow, you're actually doing pretty good. That side effect of yours is something." The goat Sin responded calmly as he kept pulling, "I'd be doing better. But currently there is approximately 564 pounds of extra weight atop the object in question." He went on, "I assume the extra 4 pounds are due to your previous multivisceral stomach transplant?" He inquired. All Might nodded and said, "Yep. Getting my weight back is a long journey. Am I right in hoping that the next 10 months will get you extra strength with the plan we have?" He inquired. As he completed removing the refrigerator and began lifting it, the Sin of Lust remarked, "Logically it would be best that I finish it in 5 months so that I can have extra time to get used to One for All's backlash." The hero nodded and said, "That is a fair point." He could see finishing in 5 months and using the additional time to deal with the criticism. In fact, Izuku's already remarkable strength supported this reasoning, so it seemed reasonable to follow. As he returned to his non-hero work state, he added, "But there's no need to rush. Slow and steady wins the race." While true, allowing for time to adjust to the backlash is a must. Izuku argued. The thinner man grinned and said to his pupil, "True. But we'll get to that in due time." Time skip. Since today was one of his rest days, Izuku sighed as he strolled through Musudafu, Japan, his body and mind worn out from the workout he had done earlier. "It's difficult to train to inherit a quirk," he muttered to himself. "Come to think of it, I don't think I've ever really experienced emotions like these," he thought. He nodded and stroked his chin, saying, "Is this how people normally feel? Odd." He was thinking about this new perspective when he bumped into someone and they both stumbled back from each other in shock. Izuku began to apologize, "Oh my, I'm sorry," but blinked when he saw a girl's clothes wrapped around an invisible body in front of him. These clothes included a pink shirt, jeans, and pink shoes. The girl said, Hi. The boy scratched his head, unsure of how to react, and said, The girl shrugged and said, yeah, a lot of people get confused by my quirk. This was obviously typical of her. I take it that it's a mutant-type quirk. He inquired. Technically, I'm constantly refracting light from my body, making me look invisible. She clarified. She went on, but I can't turn it off. The goat-sin tilted his head in perplexity and said, that seems rather impractical. Oh my goodness, that is so cute. The invisible girl let out a startled gasp. Izuku rubbed his chin and said, is there a way I can potentially help you with your quirk? The girl said, I'm not really sure. She went on, but why, though? No one asked you to. The sin of lust nodded and said, that's true. He asked, but it's never a bad thing to help someone, is it? True, but how would you even do it? Asked the girl who couldn't see. Izuku said, before I explain, what's your name? The now named Toru responded, oh, Toru Hagakure. Who are you? With his trademark salute, the greenette responded, Izuku Midoriya, the goat-sin of lust. He's so cute. Toru remarked, why you don't seem like the type for lust. She cried out in her head. Izuku broke his stance and explained, not the lust for the pleasures of flesh, no. I lust for knowledge and understanding. He clarified, of human emotions, specifically. As the two walked together, Toru questioned, why that? To put it as simply as I can, I'm on what's known as the autism spectrum. I feel emotions like everyone else, but I have a hard time correctly processing, recognizing and expressing them within around myself and others. The balding kid clarified. Even though he didn't fully comprehend it, he was able to do so because it was in terms he was familiar with from reading psychology books. With an invisible nod, Toru acknowledged, oh, okay. Returning to the topic at hand, she said, but how is your quirk gonna help me? My quirk, invasion, can allow me to tamper with the minds of others in various ways. He stated. With a flash of his quirk on the tip of his finger, he went on, the body often responds to the state of the mind. I'd simply be exploiting this connection to your own benefit and my own ability to study any resulting phenomena. With her invisible eyes scanning the surroundings, Toru questioned, should we be doing this experiment out in the open? You're fully clothed, so I fail to see any drawbacks at present. The kid said. The invisible girl thought with a sweat drop, wow, he really is slow to process social norms. She attempted to clarify, saying, what I mean is, should we take this to a more private setting? No reason to cause a panic. Izuku clarified, it would take a long time to find a suitable place. He pondered, unless you happen to have one in mind. Toru said, one of our houses, maybe. Impractical. My house is a train ride away and I have no prior knowledge of where your house is. He responded. The invisible girl sighed, oh, right. How about we give each other our contact info and bounce ideas around? She suggested. The goat-sin thought, still seems impractical, before firing a tiny invasion flash into Toru's neck. He caressed his chin and hummed, WHWH, what are you doing? The girl anxiously swallowed. The boy clarified, merely ascertaining the mental processes of how your quirk works. It would seem that your quirk factor is similar to heteromorphic types, allowing your body to remain invisible by perpetually refracting light. He started, but this also means you can potentially learn how to move your body's refraction rate down, thus allowing you to become visible. He went on, not turning your quirk off per se, but lowering the setting, so to speak. He went on, like having a computer whose screen is white due to the light being at its highest setting, so you dim the light to get a clearer picture. He continued. Toru exclaimed, amazed, wow, you can tell that much about my quirk after one scan. The goat-sin nodded in response, yes, I can. If you like, I can adjust your mind to grant you a subconscious control of your quirk based on what I described. He said. The girl said, it won't hurt, will it? Unlikely. Was Izuku's straightforward response. Then Izuku began making some changes, and Toru sensed something was happening. She was startled to see her hands gradually come into view. They were once again invisible due to her hesitation, but this gave her the opportunity to gradually become visible for the first time. When it was all said and done, Izuku was. As he began to process the appearance of the rather adorable girl in front of him, he was genuinely unsure of his feelings. Her eyes and hair appeared almost chromatic, and she had fair skin. Like prisms, their hues appeared to shift depending on how the light struck them. He thought the color itself was quite lovely, almost like lime green. It looked extremely disorganized as well. Before speaking, the boy blinked for a minute or two. All he could manage to say was, "Cute." With a rather adorable blush, Toru stammered, Thanks. Am I really that?" she asked herself before gasping when she saw her image in Izuku's glasses. "Holy shit, that's my appearance," she pondered. Izuku shook his head to get it out after they both stood there for a while. The goat-sin asked, "So, how does it feel?" The girl said, "It feels nice," and then gradually returned to her invisible state. "But I think I'm more comfortable with being invisible. At least for now," he replied. As they kept walking together, the boy nodded and said, "Ah." Time skip. Izuku and Toru would continue to see each other when the boy had days off from his workouts, with the invisible girl gradually growing more at ease with being seen, at least around him, and him growing accustomed to expressing himself as a result of her teachings. Additionally, it didn't hurt that the girl occasionally caught glimpses of the boy's improvement in his training. The two were currently at a cafe, however, following an especially lengthy training session in which All Might had Izuku swim mile-long laps in the ocean, leaving his hair still damp from the subsequent shower. Toru was drying him off as the two enjoyed coffee. "What are you even doing that's making you push yourself so hard?" She was puzzled. The boy informed her, "I'm not sure I'm at liberty to say." The girl sat down and drank her coffee, saying, "That's not sus at all." "Anyway," Izuku said, shifting the subject with a slight cough. "How did your parents react to how I helped you out?" he inquired. Not wanting to bother him with her troubles, Toru explained, "They were pretty surprised. But I wouldn't worry about it." They turned to see a deflated All Might, who now looked much better, standing there with a coffee pastry in hand after hearing a voice behind them ask, "Young Midoriya. What are you doing here?" After learning his mentor's name during his training, Izuku nodded and said, "Oh, hello Toshinori." He pointed to Toru and continued, "I'm just spending time with my friend." The man nodded at the girl and said, "Oh, hello." Toru returned the greeting, "Hi." The blonde questioned, "So, anything in particular you two are talking about?" The goat-sin answered, "Just my training from yesterday." The girl said, "It can't be that strenuous, is it?" Toshinori responded, "I'm helping him train to get into UA. That should give you some perspective on it." "Oh." Toru nodded, realizing why her friend was subjecting his body to such agony. "So far, things seem to be going well. I should be ready sooner than I thought I would," Izuku stated to her, "though I will have to do what I can to maintain what I get." He continued. Toshinori nodded and said, "That's correct. Which means you need to be ready for your workout this Thursday." He continued. The boy saluted his mentor and nodded, "Roger Roger." Toru laughed because this reminded her of the Star Wars droid army. The neon greenette laughed and said, "Izuku, you do some of the cutest things, I swear." The goat-sin shrugged and said, "I'm told that more often than you think." Leaning over the table, she gave the boy a kiss on the nose and grinned, saying, "Well, I'm just glad I get to see it." Izuku's face flushed with shock, and his eyes widened as he transformed into a picture of a freckled tomato. As he observed them from his table, Toshinori couldn't help but laugh at this, finding it both funny and cute. Time skip. When the exam day finally arrived, All Might was staring up at a currently unconscious Izuku, who was snoring on top of a pile of trash he had removed from a now clean beach while wearing no shirt. It was obvious that the boy had been working hard on the beach since either nightfall or early morning because he was out like a log. He noticed that everything was immaculate as he gazed out at the beach. Not even a bottle cap, much less a piece of plastic, was left on the sand. "He has definitely exceeded my expectations," he thought to himself as he got buff, jumped to the top of the trash pile, picked up his pupil, and then jumped back down. Then, since it was quite cold at the time, he dressed warmly. The man sighed, genuinely unsure of how to proceed. "He's out like a light, not sure what I should do right now." Izuku stirred, then opened his eyes and groaned groggily, as though that choice had been made for him. "Oh, hi, Toshinori," he moaned drowsily about it. All Might nodded as he put the teenager down, saying, "Hey kid. You did great. Now your body should be able to handle one for all with only moderate backlash." The goat-sin moaned with satisfaction as he stretched his newly acquired muscles to avoid collapsing in a heap. "So," he asked, "how am I gonna inherit it?" The man abruptly pulled a hair from his head and said, "This way." He said, "Eat this." Izuku stroked his chin and nodded. Ah, I see. The boy pondered, so the power is inherited from a transfer of DNA. He hummed, interesting. Yes, and to be honest, One for All is the only known quirk that can act in such a manner, confirmed All Might. The teenager pulled out a bottle of water and said to his mentor, just let me drink a bottle of water to wash it down. Later, Izuku, who was eating a beef bun and a can of coffee for a last-minute breakfast, yawned once more as he made his way down the sidewalk towards the UA campus. As he finished his coffee, he thought, maybe I should have taken it easy on the overnight training. As he passed the boy, Katsuki grunted and said, out of my way, Deku. The goat-sin nodded, unfazed by the boy's harsh greeting. Oh, good morning, Kachan. The blonde told him in a big brother-like manner, don't faceplant on your way in, you always have the worst balance. Just as he stumbled on his own feet, the autistic teen said, I am well aware of that. Lovely, he thought to himself as he collapsed. Gotcha, someone exclaimed as someone caught him by the back and prevented him from falling. He turned to see Toru struggling to keep him upright, her heels digging into the concrete. Izuku quickly stood up straight and turned to face his friend with lime hair. The Sin of Lust grinned and said, thank you, Toru-chan. As she gradually vanished once more, he became aware that his vision was fuzzy, indicating that his glasses were missing. He looked around for his glasses and moaned, oh bother. The light-bending girl saw his glasses, picked them up, and placed them on his face before saying, oh, I got you. She grinned and said, there you go. Thank you. The boy grinned as he began to accompany her to the school, but he soon noticed that she was swaying her arm. She squeaked in surprise as the goat-sin reached out and took her hand, assuming this was some kind of signal she had told him girls occasionally made to attract a guy's attention. The greenette said, your hands are cold. The invisible girl leaned on his shoulder and added, and yours are warm. The boy was a little taken aback by this, but he quickly chose to let her remain that way before putting his own head on hers as they entered the school. Later, hey, it's me, your school DJ, exclaimed Present Mike, the voice hero, to the children. Come on and let me hear ya, he continued. In the end, there was only silence in response. The blonde shrugged, attempting to avoid coming across as overly irritated. Tough crowd. After turning on the screen, he said, that's fine, I'll skip right to the main show. Like when he saw All Might in person, Izuku's eyes practically glowed when he saw the man. Surprise was the only expression on his face, but it was there. With no response, the hero went on, today you'll be doing free for all battles in super hip urban settings. Specifically you'll be going to the battle center specified on your cards, okay. Ah, I see. Izuku nodded and glanced at his card, noticing that despite being next to Katsuki, they were scheduled to visit different centers. Sucks that I can't show you how better I am now. Katsuki let out a sigh. The greenette said, it's illogical to try and one-up each other when we both wish to succeed together. A house divided amongst itself cannot stand. He continued. The blonde shrugged and said, fair enough. Additionally you'll be fighting 3 types of fake villains, each equal 1, 2, and 3 points respectively, so better choose wisely. But check it, make sure you're keeping things heroic. Attacking other examinees is a no, ya dig. He continued. Izuku was going to use his quirk to confuse people and disprove their arguments, so this made him deflate in dismay. He sighed, fiddlesticks. As Katsuki ruffled his hair, he moaned, that's plan out the window. When one of the other applicants yelled, excuse me, the voice hero took notice. You said we'll be fighting 3 villain types, and yet the forms say that there are 4. If this is a basic oversight, then it is unacceptable, he said while raising his form. We are exemplary students, so we expect the best from Japan's most notable school. So a mistake like this won't do, he continued. The goat-sin nodded and said, true, I was also curious about that as well. Present Mike remarked, oh, that's a 0-pointer. It's more of an obstacle in your way and it has no value, so there's no sense bothering. He clarified. The bespectacled teen bowed and said, thank you. Katsuki said, that guy really needs to get rid of that stick up his ass. It's strange, the Sin of Lust thought, his head tilted sideways in bewilderment, because I don't remember seeing a stick anywhere close to his ass, much less shoved up it. While everyone else tried not to laugh at the child's inadvertent joke, Katsuki's sweat dropped. It's a figure of speech, Deku. The boy blushed in embarrassment and nodded, ooh. He laughed and said, ha ha. Later, Izuku waited at his testing area with dozens of others, stretching his arms and legs. According to what he observed, there were many people, some of whom even had assistants. He looked around and thought, interesting. Then he noticed a familiar female shape in a tracksuit, but her features were unrecognizable. He pondered and started to approach her, saying, "Oh, Toru's here." But he felt a hand on his shoulder as he approached her. He turned to see the blue-haired teenager from before. Before he could say anything, however, the goat-sin used his quirk to quickly zap the boy, diverting his attention long enough for him to zip up to the taller boy's shoulders before bending down to give him an upside-down look. He said, "Bazinga." The other teenager asked in confusion, "WH what?" Uncertain whether they saw it right, one of the onlookers asked, "Did that kid just zap the taller guy with his quirk and hop onto his shoulders?" Another nodded as Izuku leapt down from the shoulders of the tall, bespectacled stack, turned to face him, and stood at a salute. "Looks like it." He said, "Hello, my name is Izuku Midoriya, the goat-sin of lust." He continued to salute and said, "I'd appreciate it if you didn't invade my personal space. It makes me uncomfortable." The taller teen blinked, still taking in what had just transpired. My apologies, then." The greenette bowed respectfully and nodded before turning to face Toru. "Thank you." One child said, "Well, he's an odd one." Another said, "Goat-sin, you guys hear that before?" "I'm drawing blanks." A third shrugged in response. "Izuku," Toru exclaimed, jumping into the boy's arms and pressing her invisible cheek against his. The autistic teenager laughed, long since accustomed to this. "Hi, Toru." One child whispered to another, that his girlfriend, and the other child shrugged. The gates opened at that moment. Izuku yelled, "Oh, time for the exam," as he hurried into the battle area after setting Toru down. "Wait, what about the countdown?" The unseen girl yelled after him. From above them, Present Mike yelled, "There's no countdown in this exam." The kid that rushed in had the right idea, so get moving. All of the examinees attacked any robots that came in their way as they set off. For instance, Izuku encountered a single pointer that attempted to rush him, from which he ducked a blow, and then struck the animal's chest with a firm bare-handed blow, causing the metal to collapse. He continued to move, thinking, their armor plating seems weak enough for me. I should be able to handle this. However, some examinees were actually frightened by this type of performance from such a relatively small fighter. After that, Izuku leapt over a three-pointer's fist and put his pink glowing hands on its head. "Hijack," he exclaimed as he took over the bot and began smashing people behind him. Somewhere else, while all of the teachers were observing the students in the observatory, they each noted a number of noteworthy pupils. The students likely have no idea how many villains there are, or their locations. Nezu said, "They have limited time, must cover a vast area and have to gain as many points as possible." He went on, "Some use information gathering to work out a strategy. Others use speed. Of course keeping calm under pressure can work as well, just as much as raw power and pure combat ability." He continued, "The best students use a combination of all these skills." He grinned. Toshinori looked at a screen with Izuku on it and said, "And some are deceptively stronger than most." Midnight nodded and said, "This group does look promising, you're right." Snipe pondered, "Heard there's a kid here with a memory quirk." He continued, "But I can't see him." The blonde man assured him, "Don't worry, he's there." Somewhere else, Izuku decided he was done with it after using his three-point mount to destroy as many villains as he could reasonably find. "Alioop," he exclaimed, flipping off the robot and sealing his hands like a ninja. He said, "Self-destruction." As he landed on his feet, the robot purposefully blew itself up. He wiped his hands, glanced around, and took in his handiwork. He was undoubtedly deceptively strong, as evidenced by the numerous robots he destroyed. He began to jog and hummed, "By my best estimates, I believe I have exactly 28 points. I think I have enough points for a passing grade." He thought about it. The ground beneath him began to tremble at that moment. The boy hummed, before the trembling intensified and a shadow appeared over the made-up city. Izuku's eyes widened in surprise as he looked up and saw the zero-pointer ascending. He yelled, "One must wonder where they get the resources for these." As everyone around him fled in fear. But as he started to, in a sense, run for the hills, he was stopped in his tracks by the sound of a familiar voice. When a girl's voice cried out, "Help! I'm stuck." Izuku turned to see that Toru was attempting to free a brunette girl who was trapped beneath some debris. To make matters worse, the zero-pointer was rolling in their direction. The boy yelled, "Red alert! Red alert!" as he raced in their direction, surprising many of the other children with his speed. When he finally made the decision to use One for All to jump over the two girls and onto the zero-pointer's punching arm, he blurted, "Alley-oop," and began running up it while his hands glowed pink. He lifted his hands as an arrow of light appeared in them as he got closer to its head. He yelled, "Ultimate move! Invasion! Blackout arrow!" as he shot the arrow, causing the robot to instantly shut down when it made contact. With his fist cocked back, he leapt into the air and flipped over the metal monster, landing on its head. "And now," he added, "deletion, Texas smash," he exclaimed as he struck the giant's head with a one-for-all punch. The robot ultimately exploded at random locations on its body, with entire sections even falling off. Izuku cleverly used the wreckage as platforms to safely return to the ground as it disintegrated in a series of explosions. The sin of lust said, "Threat eliminated." Damage to self and others from resulting aftermath, as he skidded to a landing and surveyed his surroundings. He got up and dusted himself off, adding, "Minimal." "What was that?" Toru exclaimed in disbelief as she approached Izuku after releasing the girl who had been buried beneath the debris while he was preoccupied. Before turning to face the girl beside Toru, the boy adjusted his glasses and explained, "The results of my 10 months of training." He said, "Oh, hello." The brunette said, "Hi. I'm Ochako Uraraka." The boy answered, "Hello. I am Izuku Midoriya, pleased to meet you." However, his track jacket, which was barely hanging on, tore apart as he attempted to strike his trademark salute pose, exposing his improved body, goat tattoo, and the parts of him that were remarkably doll-like in one inadvertent move. He sighed, "Oh bother." Ochako exclaimed, "Why are your joints like a doll's?" Shocked, Toru approached Izuku and offered her jacket, explaining, "That's how his quirk works." She grinned and said, "Here you go." As he put on the jacket, the boy smiled and nodded, saying, "Thank you." He continued, "There, no more unneeded stairs." At that moment, an elderly woman who appeared to be wearing a nurse's uniform approached them all from behind. I guess Recovery Girl being here is reasonable," Izuku was thinking. It was not surprising that someone like Recovery Girl would be hired given the size of the exams. As she approached them, the woman grinned and said, "Well done everyone." "Well done?" she inquired. "Any injuries that need tending?" Checking, Izuku nodded, examining himself, and then shook his head. Before pointing to his two friends, he answered, "Negative, I am uninjured. But they may be in need of medical attention." He modified it. The elderly medic said, "Someone usually needs it." The goat-sin nodded and began to move away, but his body abruptly collapsed due to the strain of using his most potent move and One for All 3 times in quick succession. "Izuku," Toru exclaimed, racing to his side. "It would appear I was incorrect about my physical condition." Izuku exhaled. "Apparently I strained myself too hard, and it's showing," he said. Recovery Girl asked, "Couldn't you feel the strain, Sonny?" Negative. My physiology makes me incapable of feeling various different things, including pain." The kid clarified. The elderly woman sighed and used her quirk to heal him, saying, "I'll have a look at your file later." With his head resting in Toru's lap, the boy sighed as he gradually lost consciousness. "Thank you, ma'am," as the other examinees processed what they had just heard and seen. "I think you should avoid doing what you just did from now on," Toru stated to him. She added, "At least until you can handle it better." The goat-sin yawned and nodded, "I agree." Time skip. A few weeks after the exam, Izuku poked at his food while waiting for his letter from UA to arrive, his expression rather detached. Being the mother that she is, Inko was not pleased to see her son in such a bad mood. She said, "Izuku, are you okay, honey?" The boy sighed and said, "I don't like that I have to wait for so long for my results." He went back to his meal and said, "It breeds uncertainty." Later, the boy was generally quite anxious, which was supposedly a benefit of his autism-related emotional retardation, since it naturally reduced his general level of anxiety. He was reviewing some notes when Inko unexpectedly entered the living room carrying an envelope. She called out, "Izuku, your results are here," and instantly caught his attention. The boy yelled, "Give it here," and his mother complied. As her son opened the envelope, Inko eagerly watched. She blinked in perplexity when a hollow projector emerged. She questioned, why a hollow projector? The sin of lust suggested, perhaps it's an extra message created by the school. As she pressed the power button to turn it on, the green-haired woman said, or maybe it is the message. All Might yelled, Booyah! I am here as a projection. To Inko's astonishment. Inko let out a startled, what the? All Might, noise. Izuku nodded and said, this is unexpected. The number one hero chuckled and cleared his throat, saying, I know it's been a while, but with great power comes an enormous amount of paperwork. Ha ha ha, he corrected himself, saying, my apologies, young man. The truth is that I didn't come here to fight villains. You're looking at the newest UA faculty member. He yelled. Inko exclaimed in surprise, All Might is a new UA faculty member. Izuku nodded, blinking in surprise. This is news to me as well. As the cameraman attempted to nudge him back on course, All Might remarked, Huh, who's showboating? Alright, I'll wrap it up, but I want to show him something first. Wait, I have to do how many of these things? Exclaimed the man. What they were hearing made the mother-son pair drool. Leave it to a career to spend days buried in work. The symbol of peace informed him, alright, let's move on. The results show that you passed the written exam and received precisely 28 points in the practical. Izuku nodded, happy that his predictions were accurate. As predicted. This would be just shy of a passing grade on the low end of the bell curve, which would result in a failing grade, if there weren't other factors. He went on. Other factors? Izuku asked, blinking. His mother asked, what can that mean? The giant of a man yelled, what could they be, you asked? Here, a video for your viewing pleasure. While pressing a remote control button. Standing in front of present mic, Ochako said on tape, excuse me. She went on, I was hoping you would have a moment. Izuku gasped in recognition, it's the girl that was with Toru. He nodded and said, Ochako, I think her name was. The woman said, Toru. The girl you met. The voice hero said, oh, need something, little listener. Yeah, that doll-like boy from the exams, Izuku, I think it was. The brunette said, remembering the moment Toru mentioned him. I was hoping I could give him some of my points. It didn't seem like he had a lot, so I wanted to help him out. She went on. Present Mike gave her a head pat and said, I'm sure he'll appreciate the gesture, but don't worry. He's fine where he is. Ah, that's so sweet, exclaimed Inko. She grinned and gave her son a strong hug. Oh Izuku, I'm so glad you're making so many friends. She exclaimed. Izuku grinned and said, yeah, so am I. He felt the same warmth he did when he was with Katsuki or his mother. Joy. As you can see, being a hero isn't just about smashing a villain's head in. It's about the way you inspire and affect the people around you. It's because of this that UA decided to implement a hidden point system, rescue points, which are given based on how many people you can save. All Might exclaimed as the rescue points appeared alongside the hero points on a screen. A panel of judges examined the actions of others throughout the exam to award these points. For example, Ochako Uraraka and Toru Hagakure. For saving the former and assisting the latter in removing the rubble during the exam, both got 25 points. The man went on. And you, Izuku Midoriya, gained 50 rescue points. He continued. This caused Izuku and Inko's eyes to widen. Although it was an unexpected development, it was by no means undesirable. All Might announced Izuku's passing score and said, all of this for a grand total of 78 rescue points. This is just what you needed, because you've landed a spot in UA's hero course. Before the recording ended, he concluded, you're ready to stand and become a hero. This is your hero academia. Inko and Izuku were quiet. After a good minute, Inko pulled her son into an extremely excited embrace. My baby got into UA. She exclaimed with joy. Izuku nodded, still processing what had just transpired. Aha. He entered UA as part of the process. No less by the skin of his teeth. He had some friends waiting for him, at the very least. UA hi. As he and the other teachers examined all of the UA applicants who had passed the entrance exam, Powerloader yelled, check out the results from the exam. Midnight hummed, wow, the first place student didn't even have rescue points. Snipe looked at Katsuki's score and said, the kid cleaned house while everyone else was running off. He's tough, I'll give him that. And on the complete other end of the spectrum there's the second place student with 60 rescue points and only 28 hero points. Midnight gave a nod. Nezu looked over the Goat Sins file and nodded, Ah yes, Izuku Midoriya. He's certainly an odd one for certain. His file states that he is on the autism spectrum, but due to the stigma associated with the mental condition in our country, he never really received worthwhile counseling. He thought. Additionally, due to the nature of his quirk and body, he was often labeled as abnormal even by today's standards. He continued. And based on what I'm seeing, the kid has a limited range of sensory abilities. Snipe added. He can taste, smell and feel most things, but his pain receptors are completely numb. He continued. Not wanting to see the goat Sin killed or crippled, Midnight remarked, we'll have to help him learn to examine his body to keep him from getting put in the hospital too often. And I think it would also be prudent to give him special classes specifically tailored to helping him due to his special needs. Nezu gave a nod. He looked back at a man leaning against the wall behind him and said, the world we live in is one where the abnormal is now normal, so we must start correcting our original cultural assumptions lest we let things fall by the wayside. He said, don't you agree, Eraserhead? The man nodded slightly and said, it is a necessity. Our country does really need to change how we see things like that, you're correct. Midnight gave a nod, though I think that either myself, Mike or All Might should be the ones to handle this. She went on, no offense, Aizawa, but you aren't exactly the most sociable person in the world. She continued. Yeah, you're better off leaving that to the social people. Snipe gave a nod. It's the most rational thing to do, you'll hear no argument from me. Aizawa sighed. But perhaps some extra lessons from you could help as well. Nezu thought, as you both share a rather similar mindset, though Midoriya's is far more calculating and mechanically devoid of obvious emotion. He added. The underground hero shrugged and said, I'll make something for that. Somewhere else, Izuku was sitting on his bed doing his various exercises to maintain his current state of health in a rather robotic manner when he received a call while stretching his legs. When he saw Toshinori's name on the caller ID, he hummed, After responding, he said, Hi, Toshinori. Need something? The man said to his pupil, Yeah, come to Dagoba Beach, I want to talk to you about something. The boy nodded and said, Of course. He then hung up and dressed to leave. Later, the round, bespectacled boy appeared as night fell on Dagoba Beach that day, where All Might stood in his withered form, waiting for his pupil. Hello. The boy waved in his typical neutral tone, but his body language was clear enough to convey to the man that he was bouncing his way toward the peace symbol and was glad to see his mentor again. One hero informed him, you may not know it, but you did catch the eye of the faculty. Izuku asked with a bewildered tilt of his head, in what way? Toshinori put it as simply as possible, well, they saw your performance and your file, so they'll at least know what to expect from you. The Sin of Lust nodded and said, Oh, your power did less damage than I'd anticipated, but I was still adversely affected by the backlash, only realizing it after my body gave out. He said. I noticed that, too. You can handle it for sure, but we'll need to build your body up to withstand the backlash better. The man with the blonde hair nodded. Or set a limit for how much you can use it for you to keep in mind due to your inability to feel the effects of the backlash. He continued. After giving it some thought, the autistic boy nodded and said, Yes, that would be beneficial to me. For now, I think I'll restrict myself to up to 5% or below until things improve. He thought about it. All Might nodded and said, That'll be a good start, I think. Now, there's something else I think you should be made aware of. He said. Izuku questioned, What? The principal mentioned that he's thinking of having you take special extracurricular classes to help you develop your social skills and help you with your understanding emotions pursuit. The mentor clarified. The goat Sin stated in a neutral tone, I won't say no to extra help. However, it was clear from his words that he was appreciative of the willingness of others to assist. It'll be taught by myself, Present Mike, the R-rated hero, Midnight, and the Erasure hero, Eraserhead. The brunette went on. Knowing full well who Eraserhead was, Izuku blinked and said, I did not expect an underground hero to take part in this. He took care to stay current with some of the heroes in the field. All Might clarified, he believes he can provide some guidance that could be helpful to you. He added as he grew stronger and started to run, Now come on, I want to see how you run. Right behind you, the boy exclaimed as he jogged alongside his mentor. Later, as she watched her son organize his belongings for his first day of school, Inko asked, You have everything, Izuku? Izuku nodded and said, Affirmative. I've double-checked. The woman said, All right, Be careful out there, son. The boy nodded and gave his mother a quick salute before leaving the room. Roger, Roger. Inko chuckled to herself as the door shut. She grinned to herself and said, I love it when he does that cute battle droid impression. Perhaps the best thing she had ever done was to let Izuku watch Star Wars. Later, the goat Sin hummed as he made his way down the UA hallway until he arrived at the door he was meant to find. Class A, it should be here. Considering the nature of some quirks, I should have expected this. He thought about it. When he opened the door, he was met by the blue-haired teenager Izuku recognized from his exam room yelled, "Take your feet off that desk this instant." As he attempted to persuade Katsuki to stop lounging. It's the first day of class and you're already disrespecting this school by scuffing its property, you cretin. He yelled. In response, Katsuki said, You're kidding me, right? The blonde teasingly asked, Were you born with a stick up your ass, or did your old school put one up your ass? Izuku let out a mental sigh, there he goes again. That was how he entered middle school, and it appeared that UA was no exception. The bespectacled boy said, Let's start over, I'm Tenya Iida from the Sume Private Academy. Katsuki hummed, Sume, huh. That means you think you're better than me, huh. Let's see that stick after I tear you a new asshole. He cracked a grin. You'd threaten me, your own classmate, are you sure you're in the right class? The teenager gasped. Before Katsuki noticed who was at the door, he merely scoffed. As the sin of lust entered the classroom, he yelled, Oi, stop standing there like some creeper, Deku. Roger, Roger. The idiot saluted his older brother figure and nodded. Looking at Katsuki, the bespectacled teenager raised an eyebrow and asked, You know him? As the rest of the class stared at the boy, who had his head tilted in bewilderment, the blonde nodded and flipped a pointing finger at the autistic teenager. As a matter of fact, 4 eyes, I do. That is the so-called sin of lust, Izuku Midoriya, the goat sin. He clarified. The boy waved to the other pupils and said, Hello. He's autistic, so be mindful. I don't want any of that stigma crap being aimed his way, got it? The blonde bomber glared at the class. This demonstrated how much Katsuki cared for Izuku. As Iida saw that this explanation actually explained a lot of the green-haired teen's strange behaviors and rather abnormal mannerisms, she seemed to nod along while the other children didn't seem to really react. In any case, as strange as it is possible to measure in this day and age. Toru, who had known Izuku much longer than anyone else in the class save Katsuki, also gave a silent nod. In the short time she had known him, she had been able to identify the goat sin's autism. In fact, she thought it was kind of cute. But just as Izuku was about to take a seat, another person entered. A voice behind him said, Hey, I recognized that messy hair. And he turned around. When the green-haired boy saw Ochako's face, he said, Oh, hi, Ochako. What do you think we're going to be doing besides orientation, Izuku? I certainly can't wait to meet everybody. The brunette grinned. The goat sin shrugged and said, I'm a little curious about that myself. Before we say anything more about that subject, a weary voice interrupted, drawing their attention, saying, If you just came here to make friends, then you can leave. As a result, everyone turned to see a yellow sleeping bag on the ground with a person inside who was merely observing them. Izuku tilted his head to the side and adjusted his glasses, clearly much more perplexed now. Katsuki and Ochako snorted with laughter as he asked, Why is there a bizarre caterpillar trying to be scary? Toru found the boy's remarks amusing and ridiculous at the same time, and she laughed. Aizawa said, Nothing seems to faze you, does it, Midoriya? As he emerged from his sleeping bag, Hello everyone, my name is Shota Aizawa, your teacher. He clarified. He's our instructor. Everyone was stunned, except for Izuku. As he used his quirk to see his memories, the goat sin pointed a finger at the man and said, Identification, Shota Aizawa, aka the Erasure Hero, Eraserhead. Quirk. Erasure, makes the user capable of shutting down any and all quirks in their field of vision that ends when they blink. Specialty. Stealth ops and ambush tactics. Occupation. Hero and teacher. Hobbies. Napping, writing and research. Likes. Cats, coffee, cat cafes, and dark comedy. He went on without pause. Note. Has a habit of expelling classes or students he doesn't like. This tends to get him in hot water with the Board of Education. He continued. After a beat, Ochako asked, Is that last part official? Affirmative, My personal trainer Toshinori Yagi was kind enough to give me a heads-up warning before school started should I end up in Class A. Izuku nodded. Iida asked, how were you able to know all that out of hand? My quirk, invasion, allows me to view the memories of the people around me and even alter them. Useful for finding potential traitors in our midst and covering up my trail in future infiltration missions. Izuku elaborated. Aizawa nodded and said, I can definitely see the uses for your quirk. That said, don't do that, it's a serious violation of privacy. He continued. The Sin of Lust saluted and nodded, Roger that. The man nodded and said, thank you. He took 20 tracksuits out of his sleeping bag and said, now, all of you put these tracksuits on and meet me at the sports field. Izuku blinked and asked, how did you make a sleeping bag of holding? Katsuki nodded in agreement, saying, took the words right out of my mouth. Later, on what appeared to be the UA track field. The children asked, what? A quirk assessment test. Izuku assumed, receiving a nod in return, I expected this. Given your nature, you perceive orientation as a waste of time and want to get straight to the point, correct? The man affirmed, that's right. Now you've all been taking standardized tests most of your lives, but you never got to use your quirks in physical exams before. He started. The country's still trying to make us think we're all equal by not letting those with the most power excel. It's not rational, he went on. While that may be the case, trying to quantify the whole of a person's potential based on just how their quirk is in a few simple physical tests is itself subjective and furthermore very much illogical. The Sin of Lust said, raising his hand. Katsuki deadpanned, you're kidding me with the hand up, right? The underground hero gave in and said, I see your point, Midoriya. But all the same, it helps gauge how helpful a person's quirk can be in various situations. He continued, Bakugo, what was your furthest softball throw in junior high? He asked. Katsuki's response was, 67 meters. After using his quirk to help remember that day, Izuku corrected, 65.7, actually. He received a smack on the head in return. The weary-looking man shrugged and said, not bad, either way. The ball was thrown at Katsuki, who caught it, and he added, try throwing it again, but use your quirk this time. As he limbered up and positioned himself to throw, the blonde said, all right, man, you asked for it. His arm moved in a circle. Die, he exclaimed, literally sending the ball flying with an explosive throw. As he displayed Katsuki's distance score of 706.5 meters, Aizawa explained to the class, and this is what these tests serve to do. Uncover the limits of your quirks, and see just how far you can go as a pro. Whoa, over 700 meters, are you kidding me? Cried Kaminari, a previous boy about the incident. That's crazy, exclaimed Kirishima, a redhead boy, in shock. This is what I mean when I say gauge your potential. Because if you don't know your current limits, you won't survive here. Aizawa said, UA will throw one terrible hardship after another at you. It's your job as students to push past your limits and overcome them, plus ultra style. He went on. He nodded and said, now, with that said, let's begin. -15-meter dash. Izuku observed the other students as they ran their dashes, each receiving a different time. When it was finally his turn, he tried to think of what he should do. By my calculations, a brief burst of 5% should be sufficient. The goat Sin hummed as he positioned himself and began directing his power, but this time he chose to use it all over his body rather than just one limb. Before taking off in a burst of green lightning, he uttered the words, increase. He showed up at the finish line a moment later. 1.25 seconds. Chimed the timer bot. Kaminari exclaimed, whoa, I couldn't even track that. As he glanced between the starting and finishing lines. There was undoubtedly no invasion at work. What was that? Katsuki pondered suspiciously. Then again, he is part doll. Does he have spring-loaded limbs I don't know about? He murmured. Long leap. Like the previous time, Izuku observed the proceedings and came up with a plan for using his new full-body distribution to maintain his advancement. He got off to a running start, used one for all to its fullest, and finished 3/4 of the way. As he stood up after landing, he thought, well, that was acceptable. Not bad, shouted the others. Grasp power. Locked. Increase. Exclaimed the doll-like adolescent as he used one for all at a higher percentage to turn down the gadget in his hands, gradually raising it until he began to feel dizzy. He stopped when he felt the sign and realized he had reached precisely 540 kilograms. He stopped when he thought he had enough for the test and sighed, "On, that's enough." He put a hand to his head and exhaled, "Ooh, I'm lightheaded." Toru ran up to him and asked, "Are you okay?" allowing him to rest on her to keep himself upright. Izuku responded to her by saying, "Yes. Just need a moment to rest so I can recover." Lightheadedness, is one indicator that he's exerting himself too much. "You'd better memorize that," Aizawa said. Repeated side steps. Izuku, ever the logical thinker, decided that since he wouldn't beat that score, there was no need to go all out because the next event was dominated by a rather small boy with purple balls for hair. Soft ball throw. Izuku was certain he had a workable strategy in mind for this test after observing the others perform their throws. As Ochako received an infinite score, he hummed to himself, "Using my increased power here will definitely help me stay in at least the top 10 or at most top 5. He thought, interesting quirk. Aizawa tossed the teen with autism a ball and said, "Midoriya, you're up." "Roger, Roger," the boy said, jogging up to the circle with a salute. "Gotta admit, your friend's pretty strong for a kid with a basic emitter-type quirk," Shiro said. Katsuki growled, "He's like that 'cause he's part doll, dumbass." Kirishima pondered, "What in the world does that mean?" In response, Ochako said, "It means his body is built like a doll." The person who tied with Izuku in the grip strength test, Shoji, asked, "How do you figure that?" Toru informed him, "We saw it in the entrance exam." Mineta, the class shorty with purple balls for hair, asked, "Wait, so his entire body is built like an actual doll?" He asked out loud, "Wonder if that makes him really flexible." Izuku didn't really pay attention to them because he was just getting ready to throw, figuring out the proper trajectory, time, and speed for the ball to reach in order to give his maximum power throw the proper amount of hit. As he prepared to throw, he thought, I should be able to send it flying farther than Kachan's if I focus my power into the last finger on the ball at the last second." He hummed, adjusting his stance first, "Ready." He turned his body for the wind-up and said, "Set." He cranked his arm back and said, "Aim." He then swung into the throw at the last second. He screamed, "Fire," as he sent the ball flying in a loud boom using his fingers' power. Since spring-loaded limbs were not that strong, Katsuki became even more suspicious, while the rest of the class appeared shocked by this. The Pomeranian called and asked, "Have you mastered the art of copying launcher weapon action figures? Or am I overlooking something?" The Goat-Sin answered, "I'll explain later." Aizawa nodded, impressed by the distance. 715.8 meters. Not bad. Now, with that out of the way, let's continue with the tests. He went on. Later, after the quirk assessment test was finished, Izuku sat at his desk and let out a small sigh. Of all the notable quirks he had witnessed, he found Momo Yaoyorozu's creation quirk to be the most intriguing. He found it fascinating that she could make anything from her own lipids, which fueled his curiosity about it. He felt much better because he finished in 5th place overall. I wonder if I can help anyone analyze their quirks at a deeper level, he thought quietly. This was short-lived, as he soon felt someone sit in his lap and give him a side hug. Toru grinned and chirped, "Nice job in the tests." The boy nodded and said, "Thank you." The chromatic girl said, "So, got any ideas based on what you saw everyone do?" "I just know you've got several already." Izuku nodded and wrote down a few specific concepts in his notebooks. A few. The girl with the invisibility quirk couldn't help but notice how cute Izuku appeared as he wrote down his thoughts. Where did that originate from? She blinked in question, then shook her head. Leaning across from the desk she was borrowing, Mina, a girl with horns and pink skin, exclaimed, "You two look adorable together." "Wah," Toru yelled, his eyes wide. "Oh come on, don't act like that. It's so obvious that you two would make a good couple." The pinkett cracked a grin. The Sin of Lust tilted his head and asked, "Pardon? Okay, do you feel anything when you're near Toru?" Mina asked, recalling Izuku's autism and making the decision to help him. The boy looked at Toru as a result, his eyes adjusted to the point where he could see her when the light hit her correctly. His cheeks briefly flushed at the same time as hers, and he became contemplative. His blush deepened as he hummed, well, I do sometimes feel like my face heats up when I look at her, I suppose that's something." When he said that, Katsuki looked at him without them noticing. "Wait, is this Deku's first crush?" Startled, he thought. "Ooh," Mina exclaimed, her face brightening. She smiled and said, "You hear that, Hagakure? Of course I did. I'm basically in front of him. The girl with the prism pigment blushed in response. The pink girl said, well, it seems like you got a chance. To her. What's going on? Izuku, who had no idea what romance was about, wondered bewilderedly. Discreetly watching the entire event, Katsuki realized how ignorant the goat Sin was and realized he needed to lay down some crucial information for him to understand. If he didn't, a catastrophic collapse might occur. Later, as Izuku idly packed his belongings into his backpack to head home, someone abruptly drew him away. That individual proved to be a somber-looking Katsuki. Deku, I'll get to the point. I saw what happened between you and that girl earlier. There are a few things I need to go over with you for your own good. He started. With his head tilted to the right, the goat Sin asked, that being. Be careful with how you treat a girl. If you're not, then bad things can happen. The brunette advised him. He questioned, bad things. How? Katsuki moaned, God, you are denser than a neutron star. This was going to be a lengthy conversation. As Katsuki described what it meant to have a crush on someone and what that usually involved, Izuku's expression seemed to change from bewilderment to reflection, then to realization, and finally to embarrassment. One thing Katsuki had noted was that, as Ms. Fortune would have it, he was essentially thinking about Toru all the time. He held his head in his hands and moaned, what a headache. Katsuki told him, hey, don't get mad at me, you're the one who was flying blind. The teen with autism sighed and rubbed his temples, saying, I know, but this is so much to process. The blonde nodded, remembering a time when he needed a lot of alone time to process what he had just told his surrogate brother. Oh, trust me, I know the feeling. He said, how should I tell her? Knowing the girls in our class. The blonde answered, you won't have to, she'll come to you. Izuku sighed, still taking his time to take it all in. I guess I just need to wait until she's ready. The Pomeranian nodded and said, that's it. Later. Izuku was on his way to class the following day in order to avoid being late, but he had to stop in the middle of his path to avoid colliding head-on with Toru. Oh, Toru, I wasn't expecting to run into you before class, he said. The girl, with a bright pink face, answered, I didn't get much sleep last night. I was kinda anxious. You may be wondering how Izuku knew this. And the reason for this is that he was able to obtain a pair of prismatic refraction lenses that were part of his prescription for glasses. For everyday use, these lenses were designed to help people with light refraction quirks like Toru see themselves or others who resemble them in the mirror. Izuku made the decision to purchase them in order to see her every day, and he believed that they were well worth the 52,053 yen he paid for them. The boy asked, why are you anxious? The invisible girl fidgeted and said, because I was debating whether or not I would do something today. The Sin of Lust tilted his head in perplexity and asked, what were you debating about? In response, the invisible girl said, well, it's something that involves you. Izuku's mind sensed what she was probably debating, but in order to prevent awkwardness, he chose not to speak. Long ago, he discovered the hard way that sometimes the best course of action was to remain silent on certain issues. As they walked into the largely empty classroom, Izuku nodded and chose to leave her to her thoughts. Oh, I see. However, as Izuku took a seat at his desk, Toru appeared out of nowhere and settled herself in his lap before turning to face him. Toru, the boy exclaimed, taken aback by what she had done. She looked him in the eyes and said, I have something serious I need to say to you. Don't be scared of it, though. It's nothing bad. The goat Sin swallowed as he observed her embracing his neck and pressing her C-cup breasts against his chest. Okay, what is it? He asked. Izuku's mind briefly exploded when she asked, do you have a crush on me? He restarted, blinked, and turned back to face her. He began to say, after some deliberation on what it means to have a crush on someone, I can say with 99% certainty that, but stopped when he noticed Toru sighing in confusion. He replied, yes I do. Toru tightened her embrace around him and grinned happily. Gazing into her autistic friend's eyes, she exclaimed, I am so glad you said that. She continued, now I can do this. Before performing the one action for which Izuku was genuinely unprepared. She gave him a kiss on the lips. Why does this feeling feel so unbelievably good? As his arms spontaneously moved to embrace his new girlfriend, he pondered. At that moment, his mind recalled the feeling he had been attempting to comprehend the most, love, especially the romantic kind. His mother had taught him the feeling of love, but since it was familial love, he was never able to comprehend romantic love. That is, until Katsuki clarified what it meant to be crushing on someone. That helped him put the emotion into words that he could comprehend and measure, and his heart and mind were now fully aware of what they were feeling. Analysis. Finished. In conclusion, it pleased him. The new couple looked into each other's eyes for a moment before stepping apart to catch their breath. Toru's eyes appeared to Izuku to be 3 times brighter than they had previously been. Izuku had a look of fresh insight in his eyes that Toru could see. The sin of lust muttered, "Hagakure, I think I finally understand something." "What's that?" inquired the girl. He said to her, "I think I love you." As the two embraced, savoring the moment, the prismatic girl breathed, "So do I." Toru remained on Izuku's lap as the moment began to settle, but she moved so that her legs were across him rather than around him so she could rest her head on his chest. When the other members of class began to arrive, they were in this position. The two in question appeared shocked when Mina asked, "Oh, did something happen?" with a gremlin-like smile. Katsuki narrowed his eyes and trailed off, "Deku. Did you and Toru actually?" Toru was flushed, and Izuku, who didn't understand what he meant, asked, "Did we actually what?" Katsuki clarified, "Did you actually make her your girlfriend?" Izuku blinked. "Oh." After a beat, he continued, "Yes I did, in that case." Mina said, "Boy, we really gotta work on that lag of yours." As everyone settled in but hadn't taken their seats yet, Toru said, "Hey, Izuku. How were you able to tell that I was blushing earlier?" She inquired. "Oh, I got some special glasses that allow me to see anyone with an invisibility quirk. Expensive, but from my standpoint, worthwhile," the teenager with autism replied. Toru blinked, startled. "Wait, those are a thing?" Izuku, who was now also taken aback, blinked. "You didn't know? A developer from my island made them a few years ago. To my knowledge, they've only just hit the shelves," he clarified. In an attempt to somewhat assist her parents, Toru thought, "Maybe I can point my parents at them when I get home." Because they shared her peculiarities. Izuku said, "I hope they can afford them." As everyone took their seats, Aizawa entered at this moment, but not before observing that Toru had been seated in Izuku's lap. "Is there something I need to know? Or should I just let that matter lie?" he asked. Toru blushed instantly at this, and Izuku did too, but only after he understood what the man was talking about. As class began, the man shrugged and said, "I'll just leave it be." Time skip. Now that lunchtime had arrived, Izuku made the decision to order his go-to meal, a Katsudon fried pork cutlet served over eggs with white rice on the side. Toru was standing next to him, which was not surprising considering what had happened recently. She had 2 soft-boiled eggs, onions, and a bowl of tonkatsu ramen, which she was clearly enjoying, as the goat-sin could see. They chose to strike up a conversation as they ate. The goat-sin asked inquisitively, "Toru, does this day feel a little ordinary to you, considering the classes we've had thus far?" The girl nodded and said, "Kinda, yeah." She said, "Why, are you bored?" Izuku sighed in response, "Yes, honestly. I was expecting more stimulus from all of this, but I haven't gotten it yet." He clarified. As she consumed her meal, the invisible girl sighed in agreement, saying, "Honestly, I kinda feel the same." From his position across from the two, Katsuki said, "I wouldn't hold my breath, since there's bound to be something that changes all of that." Toru chose to share her food with Izuku, and vice versa, and the two nodded. The girl with pastel green hair grinned and offered the sin of lust a broth spoon filled with some of the toppings from a mini ramen, saying, "Here, try this." "Ah," she giggled a little and cooed. The goat sin opened his mouth to let his prismatic girlfriend feed him the noodles, saying, "Ah." Sucking them, he hummed, tasty." Then, making sure to include the rice and egg, he offered her a sample of his cutlet. He said, "Ah." The girl giggled at him, imitating her, and then she sampled the rice and meat that were offered. She found herself becoming a fan the moment it escaped her lips. She exclaimed, "Wow, it's delicious." The goat sin sighed and said, "True, but it's not the same as my mom's." Katsuki offered, "If you don't like it, you can have a bite of my mapo tofu." Izuku shivered visibly. "Absolutely and categorically not. You know how I feel about that stuff." The boy remembered his first experience with tofu and grimaced in response. That scenario's conclusion. It was awful. In addition, the variety he sampled was created by Katsuki, which meant it contained twice as much spice as the typical variety. As he consumed the tofu, Katsuki shrugged and said, "Your loss." As he continued to eat, the bespectacled teenager rebuked him, saying, "I strongly doubt that." Later, after that, the students in class quickly headed to their classroom for their next lesson, which they eagerly anticipated. Hero class, instructed by. As he entered the room, All Might exclaimed, "I am here," and everyone jumped with anticipation. He continued, walking through the door like a normal person. Izuku laughed a little. "Holy crap, All Might's teaching!" joyfully exclaimed Kirishima. The sin of lust asked bewildered, "It was announced at the start of the school year, did you not know that?" Ojiro shrugged and said, "It slipped some of our minds." "Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Hero Basic Training. Think of it as Harrowing 101. This is where you'll learn the basics of being a pro, and what it means to fight in the name of good." The peace symbol laughed. He said, "Let's get into it. This lesson will pull no punches." While displaying a fight card, Izuku said, "Look, Kachan, something you'll enjoy." "Yes, fight training," smiled the Pomeranian. All Might went on to reveal costume cases, saying, "And the next best part of being a hero is looking good." These costumes were made by the support department based on the requisition forms you all submitted. "Get changed and meet me at Training Ground Beta," he stated to the students. The class nodded, "Yes sir." Later, a short while later, the class was leaving Training Ground Beta to find All Might waiting for them. The man exclaimed, "They say the clothes make the heroes, and lo and behold, you are the proof." As his class came into view, "From this moment forward, you are now heroes in training," he said, grinning ecstatically. "Oh, this is getting me all revved up. You look so cool," he continued. He asked, "Now, shall we get started, ya bunch of newbies?" As far as costumes go, Izuku was wearing something rather basic. He was dressed in a long-sleeved shirt with 4 fake buttons and 2 different shades of green, emerald and forest. In addition, he had on green boots and black pants. As the boy turned to face the source, a voice grinned and said, "Oh hey. That's a pretty good costume, Izuku." Toru was the one who was wearing only shoes and gloves. Since he was wearing his refractive glasses, she had nothing else at all. You get the idea. Fortunately, Izuku's autism caused him to become extremely focused on the task at hand, so Toru's essential streaking didn't really bother him. "You certainly have an interesting costume choice yourself," he said. "Yeah, apparently UA can make quirk-compatible ones out of a person's hair, but I didn't have enough before school started. Mr. Power Loader said that he could have one whipped up pretty quickly in a few weeks if I supply them with a lock of hair every Friday for the next couple of weeks." The prismatic young lady nodded. "Well, hopefully you'll get that outfit upgrade when it's time," Izuku replied. The invisible girl sighed and sincerely wished she wasn't in her current situation. No kidding. However, the fact that Izuku was the only one who could see her and that he didn't appear to be particularly concerned about it at the moment did help her feel better. That made her feel a little more comfortable. All Might said, "Now that you're ready, it's time for class to begin." Iida asked from beneath the helmet of his costume, "Sir, this is the same area from the practical exams. Are we doing urban combat again?" "Nope, I'm taking things a step further. We'll be doing indoor training," was the one hero's response. Now, most of the villain attacks you see on the news take place outside. However, statistically speaking, the run-ins with the most dastardly evildoers take place predominantly indoors. He went on, "Think about it. Backroom deals, home invasions, secret underground lairs, truly intelligent villains stay lurking in the shadows," he continued. The teen with the blue hair nodded and bowed, saying, "Ah. I see. Thank you for explaining." Izuku raised a hand and asked, "So if I'm understanding this correctly, we'll be facing each other as heroes and villains?" With a sweat drop, Katsuki deadpanned, "You're kidding me with the hand up, right?" All Might nodded in response. "Correct, and to save time, we'll put everyone into teams of 2 by drawing lots." Iida said, "That sounds haphazard." "Not really. Heroes from different agencies team up on the spot all the time for one reason or another, so this can be considered an exercise for that." Izuku responded. "Exactly," shouted the one hero, gesturing to his apprentice. He continued, "Now let's draw." As everyone did. By coincidence, Izuku and Toru were paired. Izuku blinked and said, "Huh. What are the odds?" The invisible girl shrugged and said, Well, at least we know each other. She then grinned and gave him a hug, making the boy blush unconsciously as he felt her soft body against his. Holding up 2 balls, the man declared, "For the first match, I declare that the first 2 teams to fight will be these guys." Izuku and Toru would face Shoto and Shoji. Izuku hummed and glanced at Shoto, who gave him a cold look in return. Interesting. Izuku knew what those looked like, but it wasn't out of rage or disdain, rather, it was something else he couldn't identify. The teenager with the bespectacles thought, maybe I'll find out sometime. Now the villain team will head inside the building and plan their defense while the hero team remains outside. Everyone else, come with me to the observation room, the blonde hero said. Later, Shoto and Shoju were the heroes of this battle, while Izuku and Toru were playing the villains. The girl said to the goat Sin, "All right, Izuku, I'm going to take off all of my clothes and completely disappear." The boy nodded and saluted, saying, "Roger that." She was now completely nude and said awkwardly, just don't look, okay? It's embarrassing." Looking at her without showing any signs of agitation, the Sin of Lust said, "What's the difference? I'm the only one who can see you currently." Well, the girl with the chromatic hair attempted to say, but she struggled to find the right words. She felt uncomfortable even though she was relieved that Izuku wasn't staring at her like some people would have in this circumstance. The game began at that point. Somewhere else. Shoto and Shoji were surveying the building downstairs in order to come up with a strategy. The boy with many arms hummed as his arms shifted in shape. They were all ears, probably to help locate Toru and Izuku. He did just that after a moment. He then transformed one of his limbs into a mouth. Both of them are on the 3rd floor. The invisible one is barefoot, he stated. And Midoriya? Asked Shoto. Just as his tentacles improved, eyes and ears detected something, Shoji answered, "He's, what the?" Somewhere else. Back with Izuku and Toru, the Sin of Lust extended his hands while 2 pink energy bars materialized on his wrists. The boy whispered, "Sacred treasure. Double bow harlot, automatic tracking mode." The invisible girl, unable to remember any instance in which Izuku used this, gasped, "What the? What is that?" As the 2 bows independently stretched their drawstrings and fired, he exclaimed, "Now, blackout arrow." Invasion arrows flew through the structure, bouncing off walls as they descended the stairs. Somewhere else, Kirishima asked, what the heck did Midoriya just do?" Contrary to its appearance, young Midoriya's power is memory and mind-based. It's likely that he may be planning to scramble the minds of young Shoji and Todoroki. The big man replied. Knowing him, he may have just used one of his most annoying moves, Blackout Arrow, said Katsuki. You get hit with that move and before you even realize what hit you, you're on the ground, out cold, and then you wake up 2 hours later with no memory of what happened. He continued. Wait, if that's true, given the fact there's 2 of them making their way to Todoroki and Shoji, Kaminari began to walk away. Jiro nodded and said, unless they somehow block them, they're out. Katsuki said, like I said, annoying. Somewhere else. Back with Shoji and Shoto in the meantime. What's going on? Inquired Shoto. The teenager in the mask answered, some sort of energy projectile is coming our way, it's bouncing off the corridors. The two-toned boys said, think we can dodge them? Block them? Shoji answered, not sure, they're moving too fast for me to tell. The 2 arrows came into view of the 2 teenagers and zipped directly at them before Shoto could ask any more questions. The arrows struck both of the toned teens before they could attempt to form an ice wall, and they both fell to the ground, unconscious. Somewhere else, when he dispelled his bows, the former of the 2 hummed back with Izuku and Toru. He pondered, and now we wait. His invisible companion asked, how are we supposed to know if those arrows made contact? As though on cue, over the communications, All Might shouted, the villain team wins. Izuku joked, does that answer your question? Toru laughed. Yes it does. The girl exclaimed, laughing as she leapt into the boy's arms and gave him a tight hug before planting a kiss on his cheek. Izuku exclaimed, oh, as he was taken aback by her sudden and unexpected leap into his arms. Later, the pro hero asked, now, the MVP of this match is young Midoriya. Can anyone guess why? Momo called and said, sir, I can explain. Shoji said Todoroki were both cautious as they entered the building to figure out what they should do to subdue their opponents. She started off. However, Their hesitation allowed Midoriya to unleash his special move unopposed, leaving them confused as they tried to reorient themselves, only for it to be too late. She continued. Very astute. All Might nodded, pleased with her ability to think critically. Zing. Izuku grinned and assumed his typical stance. The girls had to restrain themselves from gushing about how adorable that made him appear. Later. Wait, you're telling me that you got to see Toru completely naked, and you didn't even try to cop a feel? Mineta asked in a low voice while the next teams were getting ready. Not seeing the big deal, Katsuki deadpanned, are you seriously making a big deal out of it? The Goat-san nodded and said, I fail to see how that would have been necessary. Mineta was shocked by what the two men in front of him had said. Oh come on, any guy would have taken that chance in a heartbeat. He exclaimed, you're the sin of lust, Midoriya. Don't tell me you haven't at least felt some urge to go to town on Hagakure. He screamed. Katsuki deadpanned again, saying, wrong lust type. Izuku flatly added, my lust is associated with understanding, not whatever nonsense yours is. The short stack asked, dude, you two are dating, right? The greenhead nodded and said, technically, I suppose we are. Then physical contact is totally normal. It's one of the best parts of dating, after all. Getting to hold a woman you're with when you've both got nothing on to stop you. Mineta said. You can call him a pervert all you want, but at least he is knowledgeable. Izuku noted, we only just got together today, just before class started. Nothing that counts as major has happened if you exclude what happened in my trial today. He continued. Mineta saw his classmates point and shrugged, saying, fair enough. But seriously, next time, don't forget to take your shot. Trust me, it works. He continued. As he and Katsuki faced the screens where the next match began, Izuku didn't really answer. Time skip. Everyone was lingering in the classroom as the day was coming to an end when the last bell rang. For instance, Izuku was watching his classmates to see what information he could record in his notebook about their psychological and personal profiles. He watched, for instance, as Kaminari and Jiro entered the room carrying textbooks that Aizawa had requested. The electric team grinned and said, seriously, your quirk is super cool. He laughed and said, I mean, who knew Soundwaves could be such a knockout? The punk girl laughed too, blushing slightly at his praise. A lot of people, but I get it. Izuku thought to himself, they get along almost seamlessly. Well, since we won our match, I'd say that's cause for celebration. Kaminari cracked a grin. You wanna grab something to eat after the last bell? What kind of stuff do you like? The child responded. The girl answered, well, I like boba tea, it's my favorite drink. But as for food, I actually really like Korean fried chicken. She continued. The blonde said, cool. I know a place that serves both. He said, you up for it? Jiro nodded and said, sure. She informed him, but you're paying. Kaminari grinned and said, good thing I've been saving up. Well, perhaps I should also take Toru to her favorite restaurant. With a thoughtful expression on his face, Izuku pondered. Katsuki slapped Izuku across the head and said, I told you to stop staring at people. He went on to say, it's creepy as all hell. The Goat-san muttered an apologetic, sorry. The Pomeranian peered at the notebook and asked, what are you even writing? He glanced at the two and asked, what? You think Ears and Pikachu over there got the hots for each other? According to Izuku, they do have chemistry, from my standpoint. The bomber mumbled, you know, I can actually see that. Katsuki asked, what, you thinking of being a matchmaker? In response, the Goat-san clarified, no, but I am thinking of listening to their ideas and making my own based on them. The blonde sighed and said, you are weirdness personified, I swear. At that moment, the bell rang, and everyone departed. However, Toru rushed up to Izuku and gave him a hug as he prepared to leave for home. She said in a cheerful voice, hey, wanna go somewhere to celebrate our first combat victory? I'm not opposed to that idea, but, is this your way of asking me out on a date? He inquired. The girl shrugged and said, if you wanna see it that way, that's up to you. She asked, so, your answer? After a beat, Izuku answered, I believe I would like that. The girl said, all right. What kind of food do you like? The adolescent with autism responded, I like anything pork related, but I have variety in my tastes as well. How does bao buns sound? I know a place my parents take me to all the time, suggested Toru. The Goat-san said, that sounds nice. Lead on. The girl grinned, grabbed his arm, and pulled him along. All right, come on, she said. On a particular day after school, Izuku was standing on a street corner, fidgeting with what appeared to be a fidget cube. His current attire was similar to his hero costume, but instead of being green, it was a combination of purple and light purple that bordered on pink or magenta. He turned to see Toru approaching him after hearing a familiar voice ask, "Did I keep you waiting?" She was dressed in pink sneakers, blue jeans, and a white shirt. In order to see her, Izuku wore a non-combative version of his invisibility detection glasses, just like he did in school. Her attire did a pretty good job of making her appear even more adorable and feminine than usual, which caused the boy to blush even though he was still unfamiliar with the idea of romance and romantic attraction in general. The goat Sin answered, trying not to stutter too much, "And no. Not long." The girl exclaimed, "Oh, what relief," as they started to walk together. "So, I was thinking that since we have a bit before dinner this evening, we could go to a Meet the Cats adoption event at the JSPCA. He replied. Izuku, who likes cats, nodded and said, "Oh, that sounds fun." The invisible girl chirped, "Great. Let's go," and guided Goat Sin. Later, Izuku and Toru soon entered the room where the Meet the Cats event was taking place after they had arrived at the JSPCA headquarters. It goes without saying that the invisible girl was giddy with anticipation, wanting to swoon over and kiss all the adorable cats and kittens. Izuku couldn't help but notice that Toji, a very fluffy kitten, was actually a little conceited and seemed to love attention. Toji was a white and sun gold kitten with orange stripes and a tiny spot on his chest. However, because he was of the flat-faced breed, he also had a flat face. Toru was quick to hold him because she liked him. Tama, a smaller orange and white Angora cat, came in second. She seemed to have a strong affinity for girls because she settled into Toru's lap right away, while Toji relished Izuku's head scratches. However, a different cat caught the goat Sin's attention more than these two. A tortoise cat, brown and white, was comfortably resting on one of the tiny beds. She had no worries at all and was sleeping soundly. Above all, Izuku thought this particular cat was unique. He approached the sleeping cat and started caressing her back, causing her to turn and reveal her belly without realizing it. The Sin of Lust pondered, "I like this one." As he picked her up, he said, "She reminds me of myself." One of the staff members informed him, "Ooh, that's Karen. She's one of the most laid-back cats we have." As Karen awoke in Izuku's arms and began gazing at him with the largest green eyes he had ever seen on a cat, she continued, "She's also one of our kittens who we suspect has autism as well." Izuku immediately said, "I'll take her." He felt a deep connection to the young girl. Toru added, "Make it 3. While holding Tama and Toji, who were acting as though they had picked her. The woman smiled and nodded, saying, "You'll need to fill out an application, but I think we can work something out." With a covert wish to bring Karen home, Izuku asked, "What do we need to do?" The woman led the couple back to the main desk and said, "Come with me, we'll get the paperwork for you." Later, approximately 30 minutes later, Izuku and Toru were strolling hand in hand while their 3 kittens napped in a crate stroller behind them. "Luckily, I let my mother know what was going to happen. She's okay with a cat being adopted," Izuku said. Toru nodded as they arrived at a nearby cafe, more precisely, a cat cafe, and said, "I asked my parents before I left, so they know exactly what I'm bringing home." As a result, they were able to enjoy their date without worrying about their kittens missing them. "So I've finally sent in the request forms for my new costume. It's being made right now," said Toru to him. Izuku nodded and said, "Good. That will solve one issue. What kind of design did you go with?" he inquired. "Just a simple sleeveless, short leg-length bodysuit that matches my gloves and boots. Nothing too flashy." She sighed. She sighed as she showed him a photo on her phone that featured a tiny heart-shaped dog tag that read Toru x Izuku. "However, when I showed the concept art to Mina and the other girls, she suggested I add this to the part of the suit that forms a neck collar." She blushed and muttered, "It was so embarrassing." After a beat, Izuku remarked, "You'd look better if that was a cat collar." Toru froze at this, her face flushed bright pink as she stared at the goat Sin in disbelief. She looked off to the side and said nervously, "What? Izuku, I didn't know you were into kinky stuff like that." Her fingers were twitching. "Kinky?" the boy asked, his head cocked in perplexity. "Oh no," the invisible girl moaned in her head. "Izuku, When a guy gets a girl a collar or vice versa, that typically means that they want their relationship to one where one has a degree of consensual ownership over the other. She clarified. Izuku blinked. Oh, he changed it too. I'd rather not have that. After receiving another perplexed glance, the girl corrected, well, it can also be just a way of displaying that your partner is off the market as well. Meaning it'll deter anyone from approaching them romantically or otherwise. She went on. Izuku hummed, I see. He asked, would you ever show interest in such a thing? She sipped her coffee nervously and blushed, admitting, I mean, it does sound kinda sexy, I won't lie. The goat-sin assured her, I won't pressure you into it. With little else happening between them, Toru simply nodded as they resumed their date, but she was secretly picturing how she would appear wearing a collar. Later, as the two made their way home, little Karen safely sleeping in his coat, Izuku remarked, well, my house is this way. He nodded and said, I'll see you tomorrow. She was on her tiptoes and kissing him when Toru exclaimed, wait, Izuku. The boy stopped and turned to face her. Oh, the goat-sin exclaimed, somewhat taken aback. She smiled and said, that date was really fun. Thanks for being there. The boy nodded and blushed brightly from his girlfriend's unexpected kiss. You're welcome. After their adorable little conversation, they left and headed home. Later, Izuku found his mother waiting for him when he arrived at his apartment. Her face brightened when she saw Karen. As the kitten gazed at her with her big eyes, she took it into her arms and said, oh. Is this the little one you mentioned earlier? Her son nodded in agreement, saying, yes. I was told she was diagnosed with autism, so she seemed like a good match. Inko grinned and held up little Karen in her arms while the kitten gazed at her before cuddling up to her. Well, no matter if she is or not, we'll make it work. It would undoubtedly be all right. Time skip. Everyone was attempting to get to class the following day while being harassed by what appeared to be a horde of reporters from different media outlets. On his way to class that morning, Izuku came upon this scene. One of the reporters asked, hey, kid, what's learning from All Might like? Izuku said as he hurried away, sorry, I have no time for the press. The reporter muttered, well, that's rude. Izuku entered his classroom, took his usual seat, and let his thoughts wander while he worked on the drawings of his classmates that went with his notebook analysis of their peculiarities. He soon forgot that he was actually beginning to draw a collar around the neck of his sketch of Toru as his mind drifted to what Toru had said about how a person giving their significant other a collar could be seen as a way of marking one's territory, so to speak. He didn't realize it until he had completed it. As soon as he realized what he had done, the sin of lust wanted to blush, but the more he looked at the picture, the more he appeared to believe that it was actually pretty adorable. Before anyone could see it, he hastily concealed it. After all, there's no reason to give anyone ammunition to mock him. When he was doing this, he didn't see Aizawa enter the room and inform the class that they needed to choose a representative for the house. After ignoring everyone's declarations that they wanted to be the class representative, he heard the pertinent part of the vote concluded by Iida. Because he detested politics, Izuku chose not to run for the job. Later, after persuading Toru to support Iida instead of herself or him and her doing the same with Ochako, the election came to an end a short while later, and Iida won with 3 votes overall. Aizawa added in the final vote that gave Iida the job because Momo ultimately received the same amount. The sin of lust shrugged and said, well, at least it's resolved. Katsuki gave a nod of agreement and said, tell me about it. Now, we'll be resuming regular classes, but be mindful that hero basic training will be shorter today on account of tomorrow's lesson. Aizawa stated to the students. What exactly is the lesson for tomorrow? Izuku asked. Rescue training. We'll be going to an off-campus facility for it, replied Aizawa. The goat-sin nodded and said, understood. Later. Now that lunchtime had arrived, everyone was discussing the recent small-scale election. While eating a plate of Japanese rice curry, the speedster confessed, I was quite surprised that I got multiple votes, to be perfectly honest. Izuku turned to Ochako and Toru and said, you're the most qualified of us all, from my perspective anyone else would have done a terrible job at it. He clarified, no offense intended. The 2 girls shrugged casually and said, none taken. You didn't seem to be fond of the position, Midoriya. Why? Iida pondered. The goat-sin gave a straightforward response, not particularly interested in carrying on the discussion, because I prefer action over politics. However, another thought did occur to me. Izuku used his quirk to give Iida a quick zap so he could get the information he needed before he spoke. The Goatsin said, Iida, your family runs a hero agency, correct? The runner with blue hair blinked in response, yes. Why? Given how similar the two were, the Sin of Lust remarked, would that mean that you're related to the turbo hero Ingenium? You do have similar quirks. Wait, what? Ochako exclaimed, turning to face Iida. Iida sighed in disappointment. I was afraid that people would treat me differently if they knew about my family. But yes, Tensai Iida, also known as Ingenium, is my elder brother, and as the second eldest, I strive to be just like him. He grinned. Sounds like you've got a lot of pressure, then, Toru said. However, as soon as she said this, alarms went off throughout the school, and everyone began to react by packing into the hallways and turning into a complete mob. Izuku complained, this is incredibly unpleasant. While being shoved around by the crowd, Ochako yelled, before we get trampled, we need to calm everyone down. As Iida appeared to notice something outside the window, Izuku followed his gaze and discovered that the press was responsible for the security breach. Iida called Izuku, if you can get up to a high enough spot, I'll calm everyone so you can tell them what's going on. He continued. On it, the speedster with the bespectacles nodded. Uraraka, touch my hand. He yelled at the brunette. Ochako nodded and said, got it, as she reached out and barely touched his hand, making him float. And now, the Sin of Lust uttered as he fought back. He exclaimed, invasion, special move, calming Aurora, as a pink light erupted from his body, striking everyone in his vicinity. Everyone became calmer as a result of the immediate effect. Seeing that Izuku had completed his task, Iida called out, everyone, listen. As everyone turned to face him. Remain composed. We are UA students, and we must demonstrate that we are the best of the best. He said as plainly as he could. As the police arrived, everyone began to mutter as they gradually began to feel more relaxed. Katsuki sighed, finally, shit show's over. Time skip. The following day, as everyone prepared for the class trip off campus, Izuku quickly noticed Toru's new costume, the one she had mentioned to him during their date. She did look good in the new outfit, he had to admit. She continued to wear the gloves and boots, primarily to let others know where she was. Iida took Izuku's advice and also purchased a pair of refraction-reducing glasses, noting, I see the new costume came in. The boy with green hair grinned and said, yes, I'm glad you were able to get it completed. The invisible girl nodded and said, yeah, it's certainly better than what I started out with. Much more comfy, too. The other three nodded as Ochako acknowledged, yeah, skin-tight suits aren't really my style, but it's at least practical. Later, following the bus's loading, Iida moaned in disappointment, the bus, open layout ruined my boarding strategy. Izuku informed him, it's not that big of a deal. Toru shrugged and said, he's right. Bus layouts rarely matter anyway. Sue looked at Izuku and said, if we're pointing out the obvious, then there's something I'd like to say. She went on, about you, actually. The boy hummed, that power you have, the one that you used on the tests. It's a lot like All Might's. The little frog girl commented. How do you get it? Does your memory quirk let you copy stuff like that with your doll body? She inquired. Izuku thoughtfully responded, I've never really paid attention to that detail. It could, but I'm not sure right now. It must be nice having an emitter-type quirk, you can do a bunch of flashy stuff with it. Kirishima said. He hummed and showed off his arm quirk, saying, my hardening super strong and can destroy bad guys in a fight, but it's not all that impressive. Izuku corrected, in fact, there are times when your quirk could be perfect. Such as shielding people from projectile fire or acting as a battering ram to get through a barricade protecting villains. He continued. The redhead hummed in shock, you think so? Seems I could be a more popular hero if I had something flashier. But if there's anyone here with pro quirks, it's Todoroki and Bakugo. He said. Yeah, but Bakugo's always angry, so he'll never be that popular. Sue responded. What did you say? I'll kick your ass, the Pomeranian growled. See, said the frog girl, proving her point. Kaminari said, ya know, we basically just met you. So it's kinda telling that your personality is flaming crap mixed with garbage. He continued. You're going to regret applying to this school, you loser, I'll kill you. Katsuki yelled. Izuku thought, well, Kachan getting teased is a new sight. Later, another expert, the Space Hero 13, greeted them all when they arrived at the off-campus facility and escorted them inside, revealing that the USJ was essentially a heroes-in-training disaster theme park. Izuku didn't really see the connection, even though everyone else seemed to think it was similar to Universal Studios Japan. Additionally, he ended up ignoring a speech that 13 gave about how their peculiarities could be dangerous because, to him, that was a pointless topic. Instead, he focused on the strange behavior of the lights and fountain, which attracted his attention. He narrowed his eyes and muttered, "That's not normal." Everyone turned to look where he was looking, and they saw a big purple portal open up out of nowhere, and a number of people began to leave. "Everyone stay together. 13, protect the students," yelled Aizawa. "What is that?" asked Kirishima. "Has the training started already? I thought we were rescuing people," he inquired. The erasure hero yelled, "Stay back," and put on his goggles. "This is real. Those are villains," he asserted, appearing prepared to engage in combat. He informed them, "I'll have to hold them off." Izuku began to pass his teacher as though he could read his mind. To everyone's surprise and the villains' perplexity, the goat-sin abruptly began to move in the direction of the villains, saying, "There's a simpler way." One of the villains with gun barrels for fingers asked, "What the? Who's this shrimp?" A woman wearing ammo belts for hair asked, "Why is a kid coming our way? Didn't the intelligence say that All Might and 13 were the only ones here?" "I'm not sure, but if he believes he can defeat us, he's dead," said another horned man. Then Izuku appeared with his two bows and started shooting at the bad guys. As his energy bows materialized, the Sin of Lust declared, "Sacred treasure, double bow harlot." Before his power's arrows flew everywhere, he retracted the drawstrings and uttered the words, "Now, rewrite light." Approximately 75% of the villains were hit by the attack, which caused them to pause. Midoriya, you know those arrows didn't do anything, don't you, man?" Kirishima responded. But they began attacking one another a few seconds later as the mental rewrite took effect. Bazinga! As Aizawa touched down beside him, the bespectacled boy grinned and saluted. His question was, "Did you rewrite their minds to turn them on each other?" Izuku nodded and said, "Yes. I knew that it would lighten the load drastically. It's a rather simple trick. I made them view each other as enemies rather than allies," he clarified. Eraserhead nodded and said, "Right, by altering their perception." With a finger to his lips and his glasses adjusted, the goat-sin whispered to him, "Shush. This is only a stop-gap. Once it wears off they'll return to normal. Moreover, their memory of being under this spell will also be erased." He continued. The underground hero put on his goggles and nodded, saying, "So better to work fast." "Got it." Izuku, on the other hand, simply continued to move in the direction of the villains' main center, dodging the criminals as they threw each other into the air, even stepping on a few who passed out in his path or avoiding a splash of water when some were thrown into the shipwreck area. Like AT-700 on a mission, he walked steadily and evenly with very little rocking, and his expression was blank. Upon observing Izuku's gait, the hand villain remarked, "That kid, he's different from the others." The villain from Warpgate nodded and said, "Yes, he seems almost emotionless." Before they could say anything, Izuku suddenly charged forward at breakneck speed, punching the hand villain so hard that he lost his breath. He then sent him flying back with an uppercut to the chin, knocking off the hand on his face as he landed flat on his back. He tried to sit up, gasping in shock and disbelief, "What the? A child that lanky could not possibly hit that hard, that was not normal." As he stood there, prepared to strike again if necessary, the boy hummed to himself, "Analysis, target physical threat of bodily harm, negligible. Theory. Target not physically powerful. Hypothesis. Brute force may not be necessary." The hand villain barked, "Nomu, subdue him." And Izuku saw a massive beast with black skin, a bird beak, and an exposed brain wearing brown cargo shorts. As the beast tried to attack, the boy hummed, "Interesting." He jumped over the animal's arm and onto its shoulders, then placed his hands on the sides of its head. "Hijack," he said. After a pause, the Hulk began attacking its purported masters rather than him. As he teleported out of the way of a punch, the well-dressed villain cried out in shock, "What is going on?" The Sin of Lust snapped his fingers and gestured to the two villains, saying, "Eliminate." The hand and warp villains attempted to avoid Nomu's grasp as he roared and charged at the two leaders at blinding speeds, smashing and attempting to grab them with his brute strength in an attempt to take them down. The hand villain yelled, "Nomu, what are you doing? Attack the brat, not us." But was disregarded. The goat Sin pushed up his glasses and said matter-of-factly, "He won't listen to you. My hijack allows me to take control of the minds of whomever I use it on for a limited period of time, depending on their intellectual level." He clarified. He went on, "The weaker their mind, the stronger my control. Moreover, given that Nomu is essentially mindless, this means that I can completely control him indefinitely if I so choose." He continued. The warp villain snarled, "Blast it all." After realizing that their secret weapon had been taken, the hand villain yelled, "Kurogiri, do something," at his fellow countrymen, who warped him to avoid another blow from the subdued Nomu. "I'm not sure what I can do without sending Nomu elsewhere," Tamura Shigaraki. Kurogiri yelled in response, dodging another blow. Shigaraki sprang back. "Who cares where you send him? Just get him away from here so we can deal with this kid first," he yelled. When Kurogiri realized he had no other option, he sent Nomu somewhere outside the USJ by creating a wormhole beneath him. Although it wasn't perfect, it was still preferable to the goat Sin having control over it. "Okay, I've had just about enough of your cheat code using ass," Shigaraki yelled, pointing a finger at Izuku. He yelled, "Just who the hell are you?" As he made the W hand salute, the walking description of autism said, "I am Izuku Midoriya, the sin of lust, the goat Sin." Sparkle, he grinned. "Sweet dropping," Tamura remarked. "This kid is one banana short of a fruit salad." The two turned to face Izuku when he asked, "I know you are, but what am I?" He laughed and said, "Heh heh heh, bazinga." After a beat, Kurogiri asked, "Scatter the students." In response, Tamura nodded, "Scatter the students." But, boom, after the dust settled, it became clear that All Might had arrived. Two explosions were heard as Nomu and an unidentified figure abruptly exploded through the main entrance and the west wall, respectively. Izuku looked at his teacher and said, "Oh, hello, All Might." He jumped on his heels and exclaimed, "Uh-oh," as he popped out of Nomu's way. Nomu, who was no longer directly under his control, then began attacking All Might. There was no space for the Sin of Lust to regain control of the Hulk. Shigaraki yelled, "We're not letting you do that again," as he lunged at the boy, who kept dodging his blows and jumping farther and farther back until he finally found himself close to the entrance where his class and teachers were. "Midoriya, are you all right?" Momo inquired worriedly, looking for any possible injuries. The boy nodded and brushed himself off. Affirmative. He pulled out his sacred treasure once more and said, "But I would suggest that we concentrate on keeping these two busy while All Might deals with their comrade Nomu. If you have already dispatched reinforcements, it's already just a matter of time." "Easily done." Katsuki grinned while detonating a few detonators. "Let's do this." Hiroshima nodded as they charged at Tamura, with Aizawa preventing Kurogiri from using his quirk. "Now 13, exclaimed the hero of Erasure. "On it," the space hero cried, directing her quirk and pointing her index finger at Kurogiri. A defiant growl came from the warp user. "I won't let you subdue me." Izuku pointed his bow at the warp gate and nodded, saying, "No, that would be unnecessary." As the drawstrings returned, he said, "This should be good enough." "Haywire," he exclaimed as Kurogiri's powers went crazy after the arrows struck him. What have you done to my quirk?" exclaimed the menacing-sounding villain, who was unable to properly use his warping. "I simply caused your quirk to go into an indiscriminate feedback loop of subconscious autopilot usage, essentially making it go haywire." The goat Sin responded. He trailed off, saying, "In fact, it should be turning on you and your friend right about," as All Might appeared out of nowhere, swinging Nomu around like a rag doll before using him as a baseball bat to launch all three villains toward the roof. He continued, "Now." At that moment, Kurogiri unintentionally created portals that transported Tamura, Nomu, and himself to uncharted territory. The top hero asked, "Was that your doing, young Midoriya?" Izuku nodded in response, "It was, and it worked rather well." As the others started to leave, he said, "Though I think it's safe to say class is cancelled. We should head back to the main campus." This was just as Iida returned with reinforcements. The students exhaled deeply in relief as the teachers hurried in to subdue the remaining stragglers, and the symbol of peace nodded, "Yes, I think you may be right." Kaminari sighed and said, "Midoriya, I take back everything I said about you being weird. As far as I'm concerned, that's a good thing," he said, putting his arm around the boy's shoulder. Katsuki laughed and said, Trust me when I say that you've got the exact right idea. Let's hear 3 cheers of gratitude for our comrade Izuku, the goat Sin. Tokiyami responded. While they dealt with stragglers, the teachers heard the applause for Izuku as the boy was lifted into the air by his classmates and knew the students would be alright. As his friends hugged and complimented him, the bespectacled doll-like teen could not contain his laughter and smile. It turned out that being different wasn't all that horrible, and the goat Sin of lust wasn't all that different from his friends after all.
So this was it for the series. I hope you enjoyed it. To watch more series like this, subscribe to my channel. Till then, bye bye.